Hello everyone, welcome back to Excellence Talk. As usual, together with Dr. Forstner, we will have inspirational, interesting talk with our guest. And our guest today is from UK. Alex Edmans is Professor of Finance at London Business School. He's an academic director of the Center of Corporate Governance. Alex's research has been covered by Wall Street Journal, Financial Times, New York Times, The Economist, and he has been interviewed by many international television channels like BBC, CNN, Bloomberg. Alex has spoken at the World Economic Forum in Davos, and he's a TED Talk speaker with the videos which has been watched more than 2 million times. He published a book recently which has been selected as the Financial Times Business Books of the Month with the title of Grow the Pie, How Great Companies Deliver Both Purpose and Profit. Delighted to have Alex in Excellence Talk, who has an inspirational career, and looking forward to talk with him.
Alex, what fascinated me most on your LinkedIn profile is the sentence, I'm particularly passionate about communicating complex ideas in non-technical language to the general audience. So this is what I'm trying as well when I help organizations. So I'm really curious how you explain your complex environment, your research issues and everything in simple language.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for the opportunity. That's why I enjoy doing things like this, is when you do rigorous academic research, you hope that it doesn't just sit in a library somewhere. You hope that it influences how people go about doing business. So thank you for this opportunity.
In your book, you describe the idea called the Grow Pie. What is it about?
Thank you. So it's about the importance of purpose to a company's long-term success. So what do I mean by the pie? So the pie is the amount of value that a company creates, and that pie can be split either to investors in the form of profit, or society in the form of wages for workers or taxes for the government or products for customers. And often managers think that my responsibility is to make more profit, and they also think that the pie is fixed. So if the pie is fixed in size, the only way to increase your own slice is by reducing other people's slices. So that's why, unfortunately, some managers run their businesses trying to pay workers as little as possible, or avoid as much tax as possible, or charge massive prices. But instead, what I want to do is highlight a new approach to business, which is the way to get more profit and to be successful in the long term, is to grow the pie to create social value. So this might be investing in your workers, it might be reducing your carbon footprint, and it might be going above and beyond and being innovative for your customers. And you might think this idea that the pie can be grown and that everybody can win, that sounds too good to be true. But my role as a researcher, as a professor, is to use rigorous evidence to show that companies that deliver more value to society also become more profitable in the long term.
We can say why the business exists is not only to earn profit or only to serve a purpose, that we can combine both of them, isn't it?
Absolutely. I think that's really important, because often people think, well, is it profit or purpose? But why the subtitle of my book is How Great Companies Deliver Both Purpose and Profit is that you can achieve both. And so which one comes first, as often people ask me, is that, well, I view a company as being driven by a purpose. So that might be to make products that transform customers' lives for the better, or to provide employees with a healthy and enriching workplace. And then profit is a byproduct of serving your purpose. It's just like a person's career, right? When you ask a kid what they want to do when they grow up, they don't say, I want to make a lot of money. They might want to say, I'd love to be a doctor, or I'd love to be an entrepreneur. And then the money and the financial security that they get, that should be a byproduct of pursuing a career that you're passionate about, but it's not the end goal.
Purpose and profit seem to be a little bit like black and white. How do you find purpose? What you mentioned already some example. It's about social responsibility, the environment. It is what you do for your employees, your stakeholders, and profit is more about money. But how would you define purpose? What is the spread of purpose that you would define as a researcher, or how do you define it when you communicate with organizations?
I think that's a really important question, Christian, because I think it's something which is quite widely misunderstood. So people often use the word purposeful as a synonym for altruistic. So a purposeful company is one that cares about society. But if we think about the word purposeful, it means focused and targeted. So a purposeful meeting is a meeting with an agenda if I do something on purpose, I do it deliberately. So I think what's important they should be doing. So I'd see purpose to be the reason why a company exists. So it's the role that it plays in the world and how it seeks to serve society. And the important thing is it has to be focused, just like a person's purpose would never to be a doctor and a lawyer and a teacher and an entrepreneur. It would be to be one of those. So let's say you're a bank. Right, yes, we understand that climate change is a massive issue, but maybe you think that the one thing that you are going to focus on is financial inclusion. So out of all of the problems in the world, financial inclusion is going to be the one thing, rather than trying to be focused on financial inclusion and climate change and automation and so forth. Yeah, those other things are still important, but you need to know what is the first among equals, what is the one core thing, which is your reason for being.
In your book, you have given evidences that companies deliver more values to the wider society, then they can be more profitable in the long term. Could you please give some examples of this? Can we also call these companies as excellent companies?
Yeah, thanks, Murat. So what I wanted to do is link how much value a company creates for society and its long-term performance. So for that, you need a measure of how much value a company is creating for society. And that's difficult because these things are hard to gauge. But what I chose to look at is how well a company treats its employees. Now, that's only one measure of society, right? There's the environment, there's taxes, but I chose employees because there was a good measure. And so that measure is the list of the 100 best companies to work for in America. So why is that list a good measure? It's for two reasons. First is it was available from 1984. So I ran the data from 1984 to 2011, so that's 28 years. And that's really important because if I only ran it for, let's say, the last 10 years, for 2010 to 2020, those years were a really good time for the economy. And so some people might think that purpose only matters in an upswing. In a downturn like a pandemic, maybe it's just an optional extra, it's a luxury. But the 28-year period that I looked at, from 1984 to 2011, it contained the financial crisis, it contained the collapse of the internet bubble, so it contained both good times and bad times. So I wanted to make sure that this was something which was rigorous. And the second reason why the data was good was it looked at not just measuring quantitative things like pay and benefits, but also qualitative factors like trust that you have in management, the pride that you have in your job, and the camaraderie with your colleagues. And so long story short, I wanted to find out whether companies that are on this list do better in terms of financial performance, or are instead fluffy companies that are just distracted from the bottom line. And obviously I need to figure out, is it correlation or is it causation? Is it employee satisfaction that leads to greater performance? Or is it that the company's performing well first and then it can spend money on employee satisfaction? So after all of that work, what I found was that the best companies to work for delivered stock returns that beat their peers by 2.3 to 3.8% per year over a 28-year period, which is 89 to 184% compounded. So this is serious stuff that suggests that treating employees well is not at the expense of shareholders. Instead, it grows the pie and shareholders become better off as a byproduct.
Alex, if a board of a big organization would listen to you and now think, okay, so I understand, I can even grow the pie, but then I have to do this balancing act. I have to balance between money and people and society and everything. Okay, so it's like different options, and we have to decide for one probably. The question is, would you say that the optimal solution could be called excellence?
Yes, I think so. But also, why is excellence important is that many of the things that are involved in treating employees better are actually not involving a trade-off. Right? So we might think we treat employees better by paying them more money, but actually through mentorship, through giving them the opportunity to step up, through being an excellent manager, providing feedback, those are things that are not costly. And so that's why I think excellence is really important, right? Because we typically have this trade-off mentality that the only way to make your workers more happy is to throw money at them, but actually being an excellent manager, treating them as human beings, as people, not just as factors of production, those are things which are really important. And so that's why also my measure of employee satisfaction was not how much you were spending, but the trust that you had in management. And that's what you can get by being an excellent manager. So which is why I was delighted to have the opportunity to be on this particular podcast, because it's about excellence rather than a trade-off mindset.
It's absolutely fascinating, Alex, and I love the way you explain things. That's fabulous. You already mentioned the pandemic situation. Would you think that organizations could use the pandemic as like a springboard, as the spark to further improve their pie, further improve their balance, if I may call it like that, between profit and purpose?
Yeah, so clearly the pandemic has been a massive negative shock for many companies, but some have been able to respond to this in a positive way. So typically when we think about how should a company respond to serve wider society, often people say, well, you throw money at the issue, right? So you keep paying your workers if they're furloughed, or you donate products to customers. So Unilever's donating 100 million of food and sanitizer. So those are all great actions, but not every company can do that because you might not have 100 million euros lying around. So I think some of the best responses to this have been excellence or the related concept of innovation. So these have been companies which have been particularly nimble and thinking broadly about how can they use their resources at their disposal to serve wider society. So it might be you're a perfume manufacturer, and then you've quickly pivoted in order to try to make a sanitizer instead. Or you recognize that now, right, we're a company and we're now doing a lot of business by Zoom instead, but this could allow us to have greater participation from people who might be in non-headquarters locations. So it's typically the headquarters makes the decision and then everybody else implements them. But you might think, well, no, we can now get the greater voice of employees. So I think people who are looking at this as an opportunity rather than just a really bad thing and then we just need to suffer and minimize the costs, I think those are the companies which are really going to be benefiting and thriving after the pandemic is over.
So use the pandemic as an opportunity. That's a clear signal from your side. Wow.
Yes, I think so. So clearly, I don't want to make light of the fact that it's clearly made had a hugely negative impact. So I've suffered in this. I just launched a book, and all my launch events have been cancelled. But what it's allowed me to do is actually to give some webinars to maybe audiences in other countries outside the UK that I would have never been able to give a physical launch event at. So while certainly some doors close, others open, and maybe you have to think and open them yourself. Yeah. But I think to think about, well, what are the opportunities that now are given by the fact that we are able to do business without flying around the world and generating a massive carbon footprint, I think that does provide some opportunities.
What are the key messages you can give to the world to make the world better and excellent?
Thank you. So let me give three. So I think number one is, this may be tautological, but just the importance of excellence. So often now people think we need to serve wider society because there's big social problems that we need to address. And often they think, well, we're going to serve wider society by donating a lot of profits to these charities and so forth. But I think the first thing you can do is just to be excellent at what you're doing. For example, if you're running a train company, rather than thinking about your carbon footprint, which is really still important, the first thing you can do is make sure that the trains run on time. That has a huge effect on society because it allows people to be connected with their jobs, with their friends and family. Similarly, for me as a professor, the best way I serve society, I think, is not the fact that I bike to school rather than taking an Uber. It's by trying to be really excellent in my teaching, making sure that it's relevant and practical rather than just theoretical. So the best form of service is often excellence in your core activity rather than thinking about non-core activities that you can do. The second is, I think excellence involves focus. So it's just as much about knowing what not to do as what to do. So going back to the bank, it may well be they think, out of all of the world's problems, let's throw our efforts into focusing on financial inclusion rather than some of these other issues. And I think that's important because we do have limited time and limited resources. And in order to be excellent at one thing, we need to recognize, well, maybe there's other things that we need to pare back on. Otherwise, if you're trying to do lots of things, you're going to be good at all of them rather than excellent at one thing. I think the third and final thing is that excellence involves being really good, even if there's no clear financial benefit of doing so. So often companies think, well, I'm going to be excellent at an issue that I can monetize later. But I think it's important for companies to be excellent at something, even if they can't clearly calculate a profit impact. For example, for me as a professor, right, professors get their reputation and their promotion purely based on research rather than teaching. So often there might be the temptation to be excellent at research and sort of forget about teaching. But for me, because I'm particularly passionate about teaching, I will put a lot of effort into this. And similarly, it might be that you're a pharmaceuticals company and you might strive to be excellent at solving a disease which is important in the third world. Now, you might think you could make more money developing, say, dermatological product for stars in the UK and the US. But actually, no, even though this disease might not be one that clearly is going to be as profitable, let me be excellent at that, if indeed my purpose involves curing diseases that affect people in developing countries.
Alex, thank you so much for your fascinating advice. And may I add that the energy that you radiate is absolutely inspiring.
Well, thanks so much, Christian. I really appreciate you saying that, because something like purpose is something where a lot of people might want to jump on the bandwagon because it's a nice thing to talk about because it gets you famous. But this is something that I've been passionate about my entire career. So everything that I say hopefully is backed up by the 15 years of research behind it, but also the fact that I intrinsically care about it rather than just it being an issue of our time. So thank you so much for the opportunity to both of you.
Murat?
Thank you very much, Alex. It was a pleasure for us to have you here. I'm sure that all the TED Talks that you have videos, a lot of our audience will be watching them. And also the book is already creating a value to the world. Many organizations hopefully will follow the way what you suggest to combine the profit and the purpose together. And then what we call them, then they can be an excellent organization for creating a better world. Thank you very much again.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the opportunity, Christian and Murat.
Thank you, Alex. All the best for you.
Bye.
Stay healthy.
Thank you.